Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to another weekly episode of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. As always, I am Blake Smith. With me are my partners in the paranormal, Miss Shelley Pruitt, Mr. Ryan Roberts. Before I ask y'all how y'all are doing tonight, I just want to say something real quick. Shelley and Ryan have no idea what I'm about to say, but I think that I can speak for them on this. We want to give a huge thank you to anybody and everybody who came out to Fan Expo this last weekend. It was a very humbling experience, and so we want to take this opportunity right at the top of this episode to say that if you have ever subscribed, watched, listened, bought merch, came to a public investigation, came to a convention, shook our hand, told us your story, sent an email, like, comment, share to support this podcast, thank you. It's amazing to see hard work being paid off and reaching a certain level of support that we have over the last 4.5 years, and it is all attributed to y'all. We know and are very humbled by the fact we know we would not be here without y'all. So thank y'all very, very much. Now we got that out of the way. How are y'all doing?
Great. Fantastic. I also want to thank Ghost Geeks for having us too. That was amazing. Yes. Thank you for having us this weekend. But I am doing fantastic. I am ready to wrap this story up because I know last week everybody was a little miffed because it was a cliffhanger.
I'm sorry.
I want to know what happens because you ended with the fire and you ended like it was just like, come on, dude, like give us a little bit more. No. And this whole weekend, you wouldn't tell us jack about this entire story.
I didn't say shit. We were together for 72 hours and I didn't say shit to y'all.
And for you guys that don't know, stay till the very end of the podcast because Chad Wandell from Ghost Geeks is going to come on. And if you didn't know that anyone who attended one of the panels, if they took a selfie and posted it on Ghost Geeks and Everything Vaguely Paranormal's page, no matter how many times you attended, as long as you did it on both, you got an entry. And we're going to be giving away that free investigation at the end of the show. We're going to let Mr. Chad Wandell come on and give that away himself. So, yeah, I'm doing great. It's Tornado Tuesday in Texas.
It is.
And I have some weather. So if I disappear, I'll be back. No need to stop. Carry on with your fabulous story.
We will always take shelter, and safety is priority when you're in Texas in tornado season. So yay for Shelley having to deal with that tonight.
Why is it always me?
Because you're the first in line.
I guess I'm the first one in the pattern.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, I know y'all are salivating at the mouth to be able to get to this one. I have gotten several messages, text messages, private messages, been told to my face a big F you for leaving y'all on the cliffhanger that I did last week. So why don't we wrap this story up? Are y'all ready?
Absolutely.
Yes. I need to know what happened to the babies.
Okay, well, first off, I do want to say tonight's podcast is going to feature descriptions of mutilation, burned and charred bodies, and all of that kind of nature. We are going to go far into the description of those. So if you have a weak stomach or anything like that, I don't know, pull out your headphones at that point. But we don't wash over the history of this. So there's your disclaimer. I'm not going to say it again throughout the rest of the podcast. All right, let's dive in, shall we?
Let's go.
All right. Well, in the early morning hours of April 28, 1908, the Gunness farmhouse stood no more. The fire had done its work, eating away the wood, pulling down the roof, and reducing the walls to jagged teeth against the Indiana sky. By the time the neighbors arrived, there was nothing left to say, just smoke and silence. But that silence didn't last. Belle Gunness was well known in LaPorte. A widowed mother of 3, she kept to herself, ran her farm, and raised her children with a quiet sense of order. But if you looked closer, the picture blurred. Her first husband died under suspicious circumstances. Her second suffered an even more bizarre accident. Children had come and gone in her home, some buried, some quietly missing. And then there were the men, dozens of them responding to her matrimonial ads, arriving full of hope and promise, and never seen again. Still, Belle stayed one step ahead. She grieved just enough, banked the insurance checks, and buried the past beneath new beginnings. To many, she was simply unlucky. To others, dangerously charmed. Now, it seemed death had finally claimed her. Authorities descended on the wreckage, joined by neighbors and gawkers, all of them eager to find answers. Or a body. What they found was something else entirely. In the southeast corner of the foundation, beneath layers of ash and collapsed brick, they uncovered 4 forms, 1 adult and 3 children. The youngest was described in horrific detail.
Oh, no.
Face blackened, legs burned to nothing below the knees, a hole in the forehead. His name was Philip. His sisters, Myrtle and Lucy, lay beside him, indistinguishable from one another. And the woman, charred beyond recognition, was missing her head. The papers painted it as a tragedy, a mother's final act of love. They said she had wrapped a quilt around her child before fleeing the fire, that she had tried to save them, that she had died with them. But others looked at the scene differently. A body without a head? A woman with a reputation for surviving too many funerals. In the coming days, the truth would be buried, dug up, burned, and reimagined over and over. The Gunness farm would become a graveyard, a crime scene, and eventually a sideshow. And the woman at the center of it all, she would become a legend. Now, as word of the fire spread through the port, grief gave way to suspicion. Neighbors gathered near the ruins, watching smoke curl from the wreckage. A woman and 3 children were dead. The headlines mourned them, but beneath the grief, there were whispers, quiet at first, then rising with the smoke. Someone must have done this, and someone had to be held accountable. Suspicion didn't take long to find a name. The townsfolk may not have known what had happened inside that farmhouse, but they knew who had once lived there and who had recently been pushed out. Ray Lamphere. He had once worked on the farm and had shared something with Belle Gunness, though no one could quite define what. Whatever it was, it had ended badly. People remembered the argument, the legal trouble, Belle taking out restraining orders. Now her home was gone, her children were dead, and Ray Lamphere had vanished from the scene. Deputies Leroy Marr and William Antis didn't need a warrant or much discussion. They found Ray quietly going about his morning and approached without ceremony. He didn't argue or protest, offering no resistance as they neared. Told to get his coat and come with them, he simply looked up and asked one question. Quote, "Did those 3 children and the woman get out of the building?" It was a strange thing to ask, especially before anyone had told him who had died. Marr asked how he knew there had been a fire. Ray claimed he had seen smoke rising from the Gunness property as he walked to a nearby farm. When pressed on why he hadn't raised an alarm, his answer only deepened suspicion. Quote, "I didn't think it was any of my business."
Man, he's not doing himself any favors here whatsoever. Jesus.
Because a quick recap, he had already been walking around talking some, crap about her, and then she'd been walking around saying, "Oh, I think he's going to kill me. I think he's going to." So he looked suspicious from word go.
Right.
He looked suspicious from the word go because of all the issues that was happening in the last part.
And he's also a broken down, bitter, beaten man. So he's just kind of going to go with whatever they need him to do.
Yes, because as of the last episode, if you remember, he was basically removed from the property because Andrew Helgelian came into the picture.
Mm-hmm.
So he's, obviously a very bitter man at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ray was brought to the jail and questioned for hours. He held to his story. He said he hadn't set the fire, hadn't been near the house, and hadn't harmed anyone. But as the interview stretched on, he offered 2 new details that would help his story. He said he hadn't spoken up because he knew how it would look. His quarrels with Belle Gunness had been well known. Their falling out, their tangled history, it would all be used against him. He was certain no one would believe his innocence. And then he gave his alibi. He claimed he had spent the night in the home of Mrs. Elizabeth Smith. Now, that statement wasn't made lightly. In 1908 Indiana, a white man admitting to be in the bed of a black woman wasn't just socially damning, it was dangerous. So if he was lying, he's digging his own grave. But if he was telling the truth, then he was still risking everything. Well, the following morning, Elizabeth Smith visited the jail. She confirmed that Ray had been in her home, though she offered a more modest version of the story. He needed a place to stay, she said, and so she rented him a room. Now, whether they shared a bed or not, that was left unsaid. But it didn't matter. Outside the jail, the rumors had already taken hold. People weren't asking whether Ray Lamphere had done it. They were asking why. Fearing mob violence, the sheriff assigned guards to Ray's cell. But that wasn't the only measure that he took. 2 days after Ray's arrest, Sheriff Smutzer removed him from his cell and drove him across town to the Austin Cutler Funeral Home. There, Ray was led into the embalming room where 4 burned bodies waited on tables. The sheriff motioned to the remains. Quote, "This is some of your work. What do you have to say?" Ray stood over the bodies, Belle Gunness and her 3 children, or so the papers claimed, and spoke just 6 words. Quote, "Oh my God, isn't it awful?" He was returned to the courthouse. What are you going to say, Ray?
I said, this poor beleaguered man. Just,
yeah.
God almighty, being
They
led
didn't
around
ask
by
him
the
to
nose.
identify.
No.
They didn't ask him to identify the bodies.
Mm-mm.
They just wanted to show him.
Yeah, I guess to break him.
Right.
Huh. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, he was returned to the courthouse where he was formally arraigned for the murder of Belle Gunness and her 3 children. He entered a plea of not guilty, and the court ordered him held without bond, pending the grand jury hearing set for May 11th, 1908. In the eyes of Laporte, the trial had already begun. It didn't take long for the story to shift from sorrow to scandal, though. The woman found in the ashes, burned nearly beyond recognition, was missing her head. At first, this fact was buried beneath layers of sympathetic prose in the newspapers, which praised her supposed sacrifice and mourned her loss. But within hours, reporters and readers alike began asking the same question. Where the hell was the head of Miss Gunness? The absence of the skull wasn't just gruesome. It was inexplicable. Coroners and doctors from surrounding counties weighed in. No ordinary fire, they said, could completely consume a human skull. A house might collapse, a body might burn, but bone, especially something as substantial as a skull, did not vanish in heat alone. Some suggested the woman may have been decapitated before the fire. The working theory? That Belle had been murdered, her head taken for the gold in her dental work. That was a dramatic story, one that played well in headlines, but even that had holes. There had been no sounds of violence reported, no signs of a struggle, and no blood in the areas where the body had been found. Now, to settle the speculation, Coroner Charles S. Mack performed a full postmortem. The findings were clinical but chilling. There was no evidence of pre-mortem violence. No blunt trauma, no knife wounds, no broken bones inconsistent with fire damage. The cause of death, in Mack's opinion, was suffocation followed by extreme thermal exposure. His description of the body was more detailed than most cared to read. Quote, "The left arm was burned away to the upper third of the humerus. The right was entirely gone at the shoulder. One leg was missing below the knee. The left foot had been burned off at the ankle. Organs had ruptured, flesh had cooked. What remained was blackened, brittle, and fused to the debris around it." Still, no skull. In its place was only ash and the vague imprint of where a head might have been. The official ruling didn't stop the rumors. In fact, it only fed them. If the body hadn't been decapitated, then where the hell was the head? And if no violence had occurred and the skull hadn't been destroyed in the fire, then what exactly were they looking at? Was this the body of Belle Gunness or someone else entirely? By May 1st, the debate over whether the woman found in the ashes was truly Belle Gunness had already begun. But for 2 women arriving in Laporte that day, the fire itself was only part of the mystery. The first was Miss George Olander, sister to Jenny Olson, Belle's foster daughter. Though they had been separated for most of their lives, the 2 had kept in contact through letters. Jenny had written often, enough to assure Miss Olander that she had been happy in the Gunness home and that she considered Belle something of a mother. But those letters had stopped. And when news of the fire reached Chicago, so did the silence. The second visitor was Nellie Larson, Belle Gunness's estranged older sister. She arrived with her 2 grown children, all 3 of them anxious for answers. Her relationship with Belle had been distant for years. Still, the news of her death and the questions swirling around it had drawn Nellie back to Laporte. Both women were hoping to find clarity. Instead, they found a legal document. Belle's will had already surfaced. It named the Norwegian Lutheran Children's Home in Chicago as the primary beneficiary, but only in the event that all of her children had perished alongside her. Well, that clause alone gave pause. It wasn't that Belle had intentionally disinherited her family, but rather that no mention had been made of Jenny, or of Nellie, or of any relatives beyond the immediate household. No instructions for guardianship, no secondary provisions, no acknowledgement of the people who had just come forward to claim the bodies. To Miss Olander, who believed Jenny might have been one of the victims, it felt like total erasure. To Nellie, It raised deeper questions about Belle's state of mind and about what might have driven her to craft a will so narrowly focused. But the document was valid. It had been signed and witnessed, but it was cold. And in a matter already steeped in grief and confusion, it just didn't sit right. The doubts weren't loud yet, but they were no longer just whispers. By May 3rd, the ashes of the farmhouse had cooled, but the story had only grown hotter. The rumors of Belle's possible survival were spreading fast. The missing skull, the vague dimensions of the woman's body, the awkward wording of the will, it was no longer enough to assume the case was closed. People wanted answers, and more than that, they wanted proof. That morning, a new figure arrived in LaPorte. Azel Helgelian, a Norwegian immigrant from South Dakota, had come in search of his younger brother, Andrew. He carried letters, receipts, and a name, Belle Gunness. Now, Andrew Helgelian had responded to Belle's matrimonial ads months earlier, convinced by her talk of love, land, and shared prosperity. He had withdrawn money from his account, packed his things, and boarded a train. No one had heard from him since. Azel had followed the paper trail to LaPorte, stopping first at the sheriff's office. He spoke plainly. His brother had come here looking for a wife, and now he was missing. Belle had written him. Belle had invited him, and Belle, according to the newspapers, had just died in a fire. He insisted that the grounds be searched. Well, Sheriff Smutzer hesitated. His men were still combing through the ruins of the farmhouse, and he saw no reason to start digging elsewhere. But Azel was persistent, and he did have a reason, so he asked to be taken to the farm. Once there, he spoke with Joseph Maxson, the young farmhand who had narrowly escaped the fire. Azel asked if there had been any holes dug on the property in recent weeks, any places that might look recently disturbed or out of place. Maxson thought for a moment and then pointed toward the hog pen. Belle had asked him to dig several trenches in that area not long before the fire. She said they were for garbage, old tin cans and broken dishes, but something about the requests had stuck with him. The holes had been deep, and afterward the ground never quite settled right. That was where they began to dig. The first few shovelfuls turned up nothing more than dirt, broken crockery, and bits of rusted metal. It was exactly what Maxson had expected to find, at first. But as the trench widened and they dug deeper, the shovel struck something that wasn't soil. The sound changed. The texture changed. And when the dirt was cleared away, it was clear they hadn't hit trash. They had hit burlap. Beneath it was a body, stuffed into a shallow grave, the limbs folded unnaturally and the torso compressed as if it had been forced into place. Whoever had done this wasn't hiding a body for the first time. The corpse had been dismembered with a kind of mechanical precision. The legs were severed cleanly at the joints. The arms had been hacked away, the bones splintered and jagged. The skull had been crushed by a heavy, blunt object, possibly a hammer or cleaver, and one hand was still clenched tight, locked in rigor mortis. Inside of it was a tuft of human hair. Azel, this person put up a damn fight.
Yeah.
And
real quick too, didn't she? Other than the new farm boy, didn't she also ask the accused also to do the same thing with the by the hog pen with the little short? Because he wasn't putting a fence in; he was digging like a trash pit. He thought he was. She also asked him to do the same thing. Right?
She asked the farmhand for the trenches, but she asked the gentleman in part 1, William Borgiski, I believe his name was, to dig holes that were 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, 4 feet deep.
Okay.
And when he came back, they were already filled in.
Okay, that's what I was thinking about, because I was like, okay, that already raised the red flag right there.
Yeah.
So
Joseph Maxson is the second guy that she has asked to dig trenches or holes for her.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Azel didn't hesitate. He stepped forward, took one long look at the face, or what was left of it, and gave a single nod and spoke. Quote, "When you've been with your brother every day for 15 years, you know him," he said. It was Andrew Helgelian. For the first time since the fire, the authorities had undeniable evidence that something far worse than arson had occurred on the Gunness property, and they had just begun to dig. By May 5th, the digging had stopped being cautious. The discovery of Andrew Helgelian had changed everything. What began as a search for evidence had turned into something else entirely. Shovels gave way to spades, crowbars were brought in, more men joined the effort, and a new trench was opened near the same trench of ground, and within minutes, another burlap wrapped form came to the surface. Then another, and another, and another. 4 bodies in total, all dumped in close proximity, layered like garbage. The corpses had decomposed badly. Their limbs were disjointed, and their faces, in most cases, were gone. But it wasn't the condition of the bodies that shook the search party. It was what they found next. The final body in the trench was different. Tufts of hair, long and blonde, I'm going to get emotional at this part, had remained intact, even through the rot. The burlap sack had been tied hastily, as if the killer had run out of time or just simply didn't care to hide the body well. When the fabric was pulled back and the hair fell loose, the men stopped. She wasn't just another victim. She was young, and she was someone that they knew.
Mm-hmm.
The coroner didn't need time to identify her. Neither did the townspeople who had gathered at the edge of the property. It was Jenny Olson. And the day she was found was her 18th birthday.
Oh, wow.
Sorry, I've been with this family for a while. Anyways, God.
Poor girl.
The girl Belle had once called her foster daughter. The girl she had told neighbors had been sent off to college, had never left the farm at all. She had been buried in the hog lot with the others, her life ended and discarded without a word of explanation. There had been no goodbye, no letter, no trace, just silence, and then a shallow grave. It was the first real crack in the public's understanding of who Belle Gunness truly was. Until now, many still clung to the version they had been given. The grieving widow, the strong mother, the woman who died trying to save her children. But Jenny's body, well, that told a different story, a quieter, more damning one. Jenny had trusted Belle, and Belle had killed her.
Mm-hmm.
And that very same day, the press turned. The Chicago American dropped its sympathetic coverage and instead labeled Belle Gunness, quote, the most fiendish murderer of the age. More than that, they now claimed she was alive, a fugitive who had murdered another woman, faked her death, and vanished. It was the first major publication to say that many had been whispering, that Belle Gunness had escaped. That same day, investigators questioned Ray Lanphier again, pressing him specifically about Andrew Helgelian. He said Andrew had left the farm while he was away on an errand for Belle. He claimed not to know what happened after that. But his answers were growing thin, and the ground beneath the Gunness farm wasn't finished giving up its dead. By May 6th, the digging had taken on a brutal rhythm. Each hole yielded new horrors. Limbs wrapped in burlap, skulls bearing gashes, torsos packed with lime. The trench beside the hog lot had already given up 9 bodies, but no one believed the ground was finished. With every spade of soil, the lines between mystery and massacre blurred. And that morning, Sheriff Smutzer, Joseph Maxson, and a few others returned to the same northeast corner. 5 feet from where Jenny Olson had been found, their shovels struck something hard. It was another sack. Inside were the remains of what would be counted as victim 10. A torso, sawed-off legs, and a skull bearing a deep 3-inch wound, quote, as if made by a cutting instrument. The sack still clung to the ribcage and pelvis, rot curling around the edges. The body had been folded and packed into the earth like garbage. There was no effort to conceal this one. Later that afternoon, the grave gave up even more. Beneath a mound of over a dozen pairs of men's shoes, the digging crew uncovered a new mass of bones. At first, they thought it was a single victim. Then they saw the extra limbs, the mismatched joints, and realized there were 3 more. Victims 11 through 13 had been buried together. Each one had been stripped and hacked apart with a fury that defied logic. Their limbs were severed at the joints, their arms were shattered, their bones bore the marks of axe blows and hammer strikes, crushed, splintered, broken down at the ends. In places, the quicklime had done its job, reducing flesh to pulp. But in others, the lime had been poorly applied, and skin still clung to the tissue. One skull still held its brain. What disturbed investigators most wasn't just the mutilation. It was the consistency. Every body had been processed the same way. Dismembered, stripped, buried with burlap and quicklime. This wasn't chaos. This was a pattern and methodical. While as the count rose, the press erupted. Belle Gunness was no longer the grieving widow or the brave mother lost to the flames. She was Lady Macbeth, Laporte's ghoul, the Indiana ogress, Hell's princess, and the mistress of the Castle of Death. The Chicago Examiner suggested she hadn't worked alone. Their May 6 article declared the Belle had been a clearinghouse for a syndicate of killers, a, quote, man-killing trust based in Chicago. According to liveryman in Laporte, at least 9 heavy trunks had been delivered to the Gunness farm between 1906 and 1907. An anonymous informant claimed 2 more were still en route, filled with corpses and awaiting shipment. So police launched a citywide search of railway stations and baggage rooms. Newspapers spoke of a death chamber inside the Gunness farmhouse, a hidden room behind an oaken door with windows sealed shut, where Belle supposedly carried out her slaughter. Dr. J.H. William Mayer, a former physician at Cook County Hospital, told reporters that the remains showed signs of an expert's hand. Quote, the severance of limbs and the decapitations were done by someone familiar with the dissecting room. The deeper they looked, the stranger the story became. Witnesses came forward, claiming to have seen a cloaked woman boarding a Chicago-bound train the morning of the fire. She matched Belle's build, dressed in dark clothing, and carried a large satchel. The search for bodies soon collided with a search for Belle herself. At one point, Assistant Chief Herman Schutler of the Chicago Police Department publicly announced his intention to excavate the backyard of Belle's former home in Chicago. Rumors had begun circulating that she may have killed before Laporte, and that the yard in Chicago might conceal additional victims. But after receiving multiple eyewitness reports of Belle being seen alive in Chicago, Schutler abruptly called off the dig. Instead, he redirected resources toward finding her. Though her matrimonial schemes had only begun after she moved to Laporte, Schutler still ordered a review of missing persons reports. While no clear victim list has ever emerged from her Chicago years, the investigation revealed just how thoroughly Belle had vanished into her new role when she left the city, and how easily she could do it again. And as that possibility grew more real, so did an even darker story: the baby farming reports. These weren't new. They had followed her quietly for years. Stories of infants taken into her care and never seen again. But as bodies were unearthed from her hog pen and Belle's image crumbled into the press, those whispers began to grow louder. Some claimed she had taken in unwanted babies for money. Others recalled seeing children in her care who simply stopped appearing. But with no adoption records, no graves, and no follow-up, the implications were grim. It wasn't just that she might have neglected them. It was that she might have actually just killed them. One officer told reporters that Belle may have, quote, murdered children by the score, and suggested that her ability to hide those early crimes could have emboldened her to go further. Quote, she may have begun by murdering babies. No excavation was ever performed in her Chicago yard. No children's remains were ever recovered, but the rumors never really went away. And if they were true, then the bodies in Laporte hadn't marked the beginning. They had marked the end. But by May 7th, the scale of what had happened in Laporte was no longer in question. But the identity of the woman in the cellar still was. That morning, Oscar and Matthias Budsberg arrived by train from Iola, Wisconsin. Their father, Ole Budsberg, his name for whatever reason is hard to say, Ole Budsberg. Anyways, their father, Ole Budsberg, had vanished after traveling to Laporte months earlier, having written to a widow who promised companionship and land. He had withdrawn 2000 before he left, and no one had heard from him since. The brothers were taken to the Gunness farm and escorted to the edge of the digging site. There, the bodies had already been unearthed and placed in makeshift holding areas, their features distorted by decomposition and lime. Oscar and Matthias were shown one skull in particular, badly damaged but not completely reduced. There was still some flesh clinging to the jaw and cheekbone. The men studied it quietly, looked to one another. Oscar nodded. Matthias agreed. It was their father. His name joined the growing list of confirmed victims, and the press, watching from the edge of the farm, wasted no time in reframing the story. That same day, the New York Times published a summary of what it called the, quote, 4 theories surrounding the Gunness case, each one darker than the last. The first claimed that Belle had killed her children and taken her own life, possibly out of fear that her crimes were about to be exposed. The second suggested she had murdered her children and escaped, planting another woman's body in the fire to fake her own death. The third pointed the blame squarely at Ray Lamphere, accusing him of setting the fire and committing the murders of Belle and her children out of jealousy and revenge. And the fourth offered a more elaborate twist, that Belle had been the target of a murder for insurance ring, and that a criminal syndicate had killed her and her children to prevent her from revealing the operation. Each theory had its supporters, but each had its problems. But the fact that all four were being discussed nationally revealed something deeper, that the narrative was unraveling. And no one, not even the officials leading the investigation, could seem to agree what was true. Nowhere was that more obvious than in the growing divide between LaPorte and Chicago. In LaPorte, Sheriff Smutzer and State Prosecutor Ralph Smith maintained a firm stance. Belle Gunness was dead. Her body had been found in the ashes, her children were dead, and her former farmhand had motive. Chicago, however, had a different story. Assistant Chief Schuyler had received multiple eyewitnesses' reports placing Belle very much alive. Each witness claimed the woman matched Belle's description exactly and was traveling alone carrying a large handbag. There was also the matter of Belle's history and her cunningness. Schuyler wasn't alone in his skepticism. The Chicago press was already treating Belle's escape as a very real working theory. But LaPorte officials pushed back hard, and their reason was very simple. If Belle Gunness was still alive, the case against Ray Lamphere collapsed. Without her death, there was no murder. Without a murder, there was no conviction. And without a conviction, the people of LaPorte would be left with a ruined farmhouse, 13 bodies in a field, and no one to blame. So Prosecutor Smith made his position clear that day. He told reporters the case against Lamphere was, quote, complete, and that the state had more than enough evidence to proceed. Belle was dead, he said, and Ray was responsible, and that the grand jury was set to convene on May 11th. Whatever the truth was, the state of Indiana had already made its choice. By Friday, May 8th, the grave hunting at the Gunness farm had become ritual. The crowds were larger now. More than 1,000 men, women, and children stood along the fence lines, watching as Sheriff Smutzer, Joseph Maxson, and Deputy Daniel Hudson resumed their grisly work. Rain had soaked the earth for 2 straight days, making the digging easier, though the wet soil clung thick to the soles of their boots. Only 30 minutes in, Hudson's spade struck wood. It was a box, rotted, soft, and already falling to splinters. When it gave way, it revealed a new grave. That familiar stench rose up with it. Ragged strips of gunny sack were peeled back, revealing a pile of bones. The remains, examined by Coroner Mack, bore the signature hallmarks. Legs severed above the knee, arms hacked near the shoulder, bits of jelly-like flesh still clung to the bones. The skull still held a few strands of hair. Mack concluded the body belonged to a full-grown man, though the discovery of 2 pair of women's shoes in the same grave caused momentary confusion. But that confusion didn't last long. Digging resumed in the same hole, and minutes later, a second pile of remains came to light. Though there was only one skull, the tangle of bones clearly belonged to 2 individuals, what investigators would ultimately classify as victims 14 and 15. By this point, LaPorte had accepted that they were never going to identify all the bodies. But for every set of remains unearthed, there suddenly was another letter waiting in the post. On that same day, the post office overflowed with new names, men who had vanished under eerily similar circumstances. Edward Canary, 19, disappeared from his farmhand job in Pine Lake, Indiana in July 1906, his mother wrote in desperation. Charles Nyberg, a recent immigrant from Sweden, had told his boss in June 1906 he was going to Indiana to marry a widow. He never returned. Benjamin Carling, whose wife said he left a year earlier for, quote, a splendid investment opportunity through a rich widow, had borrowed thousands before vanishing. John E. Hunter, who withdrew a large sum before leaving on November 7, 1907, to marry a woman in northern Indiana. Gustav Thuns of Washington, Pennsylvania, told his family he was meeting a widow in LaPorte after withdrawing $1,000. Olaf Jensen, who told relatives in Norway he was going to marry a farm widow. He vanished shortly after cashing a large check at LaPorte's First National Bank. Others were mentioned by name alone, with no details yet to fill in their stories. Herman Knitzer of Chicago, E.F. Plato of Youngstown, Ohio, I.T. Strive of North Bend, Nebraska, Bert Chase of Mishawaka, Indiana, and George Williams of Wallapin, Pennsylvania. None had been identified among the dead, but the similarities in their departure, large sums of cash, correspondence with the wealthy widow, and then a sudden silence, were impossible to ignore. As these letters poured in, public focus shifted to the agencies that had made these deadly connections possible. That same morning, the Chicago Tribune ran a feature titled, quote, "Weave Web Around Lamp Fear." But its real focus wasn't Ray. It was the matrimonial industry itself. The article targeted so-called, quote, affinity agencies and, quote, love brokers, claiming they had transformed newspapers into tools for fraud. It was a system built on deception. Phony ads placed by prosperous businessmen or wealthy widows, promises of companionship that masked calculated lures for cash. No one embodied that deception more than Belle Gunness. She wasn't just a participant, she was the final form of the scam. One Chicago detective, Sergeant Clifton Wooldridge, called the Gunness farm, quote, the most hideous version of this scheme. He believed Belle had turned her property into a one-woman murder franchise, fed by the matrimonial ads that had once brought desperate men to her doorstep in droves. The press crowned her with a new name, the Death Harvester. One illustration showed her cloaked in black, wielding a scythe, standing in a yard of crooked tombstones, her victims etched on each one. And while the newspaper sketched the grotesque caricatures of Belle, the truth beneath them was far worse. The men had come seeking hope. Some had even brought wedding bands. What they received instead was a home-cooked meal laced with poison, followed by the final blow of a cleaver and then burial beneath the pigs. The farm was still giving up bodies, and now it was giving up names. While investigators in LaPorte focused on the ground beneath their feet, reporters from Chicago were chasing a different angle. They wanted to know if the body in the cellar was Belle Gunness at all. So on May 8th, a journalist from the Chicago Inner Ocean slipped into the morgue under the cover of early evening. The coroner had stepped out, and no one was watching closely. Inside, the burned and disfigured remains of the woman believed to be Belle were laid out on a metal table, still awaiting final burial. He didn't need long. He was prepared. He came with a tape measure. He recorded the body's height from heel to crown, albeit without the head, 5 feet 2 inches. Then he gathered its weight, or what could be estimated of it post-cremation, around 130 pounds. Now, this wasn't a rough guess. The undertaker, who had already handled the embalming, confirmed the numbers. There wasn't enough left of the corpse to identify by facial features, but what remained didn't line up with the woman whose name was on every front page. Belle Gunness had been large, solid, physically imposing. People in LaPorte remembered her clearly. She was broad-shouldered, thick through the arms and chest, the head and heavy set in the legs. Most agreed she stood at 5'7" and weighed somewhere around 280 pounds. This difference wasn't slight. It was staggering. And so the next morning, the Inner Ocean ran the story. The body in the cellar, they claimed, wasn't Belle Gunness. It was someone smaller, someone who had been planted to throw off suspicion. The article accused local officials of incompetence, or worse, of complicity in covering up Belle's escape. It criticized the embalming process, and most damning of all, it reminded readers yet again that the head had still never been found. Well, the timing of the article couldn't have been worse for LaPorte. The grand jury against Ray Lamphere was days away, and the state's entire case hinged on the assertion that Belle was dead. If the corpse in the cellar wasn't hers, then there was no murder to prosecute. And if there was no murder, there was no trial. To Chicago, Belle was alive and fleeing justice. To LaPorte, she was already buried. But for the rest of the country, the only thing certain was that someone, maybe even everyone, was lying. While LaPorte dug for bodies and Chicago searched for Belle, another corner of the story was quietly unraveling in a boardroom. The Norwegian Lutheran Children's Home of Chicago had been named as the backup beneficiary in Belle Gunness's will. If her children had died, and they had, the orphanage would inherit the entire estate. Land, livestock, household goods, and whatever remained of Belle's finances would all pass to the institution. It should have been a miracle. The orphanage was in the middle of a desperate fundraising drive seeking $25,000 for the construction of a new building. Belle's estate had been estimated at $46,900, the equivalent to over $1.4 million today. Even if much of it was tied up in assets, it would have more than covered the shortfall. But instead of gratitude, the board responded with silence, before finally coming out with their announcement. The children's home would not be accepting a penny. They called it what it was, blood money. Belle Gunness, they said, had earned her fortune through manipulation and murder. To accept her estate, no matter the good it might do, would be to endorse the path she took to build it. Taking the money would have meant placing the needs of the living above the memory of the dead. But they would rather build slowly with dignity than grow quickly on the spoils of horror. The decision stunned the public. Some applauded the board's integrity. Others questioned the wisdom of turning away funds that could have helped real suffering children. But even critics admitted one thing: the institution had drawn a line. And in doing so, they posed a broader question that no one in LaPorte had yet dared ask. Should anyone be allowed to profit from this tragedy? Because for all the bodies found and all the crimes revealed, Belle's estate remained extremely valuable. As the shock wore off and the body count grew, a deeper question began to take root. What kind of mind could do this? Reporters weren't satisfied with just listing the victims anymore. They wanted to understand the woman behind the killings. What motivated her? What kind of hostess could serve a home-cooked meal to a man, then poison him, bludgeon his skull, carve him to pieces with the efficiency of a butcher? So the experts were summoned. One newspaper called her a, quote, maniacal fiend with the soul of a butcher. Another declared her, quote, inhuman, citing the near ritualistic mutilation of every victim. Psychologists, alienists, and every criminal theorist were eager to offer diagnoses. One described her as a woman of, quote, dual personality, tender and motherly on one hand, and on the other hand, a, quote, demon without fear of God, man, or law. Another said she suffered from a, quote, mania for murdering, a pathological compulsion to kill that went beyond motive or morality. And the most chilling analysis came from Dr. Hugo Munsterberg, professor of psychology at Harvard University. He said Belle exhibited a total absence of empathy, a complete deadening of emotion, a quality that would later define the clinical term psychopathy. When once the emotions were dead, he said, a woman is not affected by any of the natural feminine feelings of horror, fright at the sight of blood, or pity. He explained that Belle would, quote, carve a body to pieces, gather up all the piteous dismembered parts, throw them in a gunny sack, carry them out on her back in a moonlit night, dig a grave in the yard, and throw the troublesome bundle into a hole without a tremor. Others said her cruelty wasn't just calculated, it was instinctive. She was described as having a, quote, masculine resolution and power of mind, a woman of selfish and domineering will and an intellect combined with ingenuity but lacking moral or religious qualities. And then came the comparisons. One journalist placed Belle alongside the worst of the worst, Jack the Ripper himself. Like him, they wrote, Belle was not driven solely by money, but by a growing appetite for blood. Her crimes bore a signature: decapitation, severed limbs, and a consistent, almost ritualistic mutilation. It wasn't just about eliminating a witness or claiming a fortune. It was about the act itself. Got some feedback, sorry.
Yeah, a little bit.
That was weird. But in every case, the paper wrote, there was a maximum of mutilation. That profile placed Belle Gunness in a category of killer for which the language of the time had no name. But we know it now. She was a serial killer, one of the first in American history. But the public needed confirmation that Belle Gunness was more than a calculating swindler. They got it through the body of Andrew Helgelian. After his remains were discovered in the hog pen, a proper postmortem was ordered. His stomach, liver, and kidneys were removed and shipped to Dr. Walter S. Gaines, a toxicologist at Rush Medical College in Chicago. His findings left no room for doubt. Gaines reported the presence of nearly 1.5 grains of strychnine, a dose powerful enough to cause death multiple times over. He also found significant traces of arsenic, further confirming what had already been suspected. Andrew had been poisoned. The conclusion shocked even seasoned investigators. Andrew had not died from a cleaver to the skull. He had been slowly, deliberately poisoned before the dismemberment ever began. And with that, the method came into view. Belle's process was very methodical. First, she served her guests a home-cooked meal, usually something rich and heavy, something that masked the taste of poison. Within an hour or two, her victims would begin to seize, their muscles contracting in ways of excruciating pain, their lungs tightening under the weight of paralysis. She never waited for the poison to do its work completely. Instead, once the victim was in the throes of agony, she struck, blunt force to the skull, a hatchet or a cleaver used with such precision that bones often splintered when they broke. Not content to simply kill, Belle ensured no one could come back to identify the body. She dismembered them, stripping off heads, limbs, and digits in a practice routine. Then came the disposal. She dragged the corpses into the cellar, what witnesses later called her, quote, private slaughterhouse. And there she wrapped the pieces in gunny sacks, tied them with twine, and hauled them outside beneath the moonlight. And each package was lowered into a pit. Each pit was then laced with quicklime. The substance burned the flesh, sped decomposition, and made the work of investigators nearly impossible. But for Belle, it was more than just concealment and went back to the one thing she always had. It was control. Every element of the process, from the quiet dinner to the burial, was built on dominance, physical, psychological, and financial. She lured, she fed, she killed, she buried. And then she started again. By the time that Andrew was identified, that method had repeated itself at least a dozen times. We probably know more by now.
Mm-hmm.
And some sources would later estimate her victim count at 28, while others suggested the number would stretch well past 40. The truth, as always, lay somewhere beneath the earth. But what was certain now was that she knew exactly what she was doing throughout the entire process. On the morning of May 9th, 1908, headlines across the country screamed the impossible. Belle Gunness captured. The story came out of New York. It came out of New York. A mysterious woman matching Belle's description in uncanny detail had been taken into custody. She was tall, nearly 5'9", heavy set, around 200 or so pounds. She had boarded a train in Ashtabula, Ohio late the night before, cloaked in widow's weeds, her face hidden beneath a thick black veil. She rode the Atlantic Express alone, taking a lower sleeper car. Passengers said she kept to herself. She didn't speak, didn't remove her veil, and barely shifted during the ride. Well, as word got out just before 1 o'clock that morning, the train pulled into the Syracuse depot. 2 detectives armed with a description and a theory boarded quietly and began questioning passengers. They were led to the sleeping woman. They waited until the train reached Utica, then arrested her as Belle Gunness, and the nation exhaled. But the relief didn't last long. Within hours, the truth emerged. The woman in custody was Miss Cora Heron, a widow from Chicago, traveling east to visit her sister, Miss Etta V. Rockefeller.
Of the Rockefellers?
Of the Rockefellers.
Oh, okay. Damn.
Oh,
This poor woman. Hey, you're fat and tall. You're under arrest. It's just like, Jesus.
Well, her late husband, Frederick B. Heron, had been president of the Sethnes Chemical Company. Cora was well known, well connected, and very furious. When the police chief in Utica asked her to just simply sign a release excusing the mistake, she shoved it back in his face, refused, laughed, and said, "I'll be filing suit for $50,000. More than 1.5 million bucks in today's money.
I mean, she's got grounds.
Well, in LaPorte, no one was surprised. Sheriff Smutzer and Deputy Antis had already made up their minds. Belle was dead, but the rest of the country wasn't so sure. And now with the body in question and Belle's face still absent from the morgue, the public began to unravel. Sightings flooded in from across the map: Indiana, Missouri, Ohio, Utah, Arkansas, Illinois, Washington, Canada, and Mexico. From big cities to small towns, people swore they saw her on streetcars, in diners, boarding trains, or walking alone down unfamiliar roads. Most were dismissed, but a few sounded credible enough to stir panic. Newspapers began mocking the hysteria, urging larger women to stay indoors, lest they be mistaken for the most hunted woman in America. And then came the clairvoyance. A local seer named Jesse Dickinson told authorities he could locate Belle using a possession of Ray Lamphere's. He claimed she was, still in LaPorte or Michigan City, hiding in plain sight. Another
near a body of water, most likely.
Another spiritualist who practiced astrology insisted Belle was working under an assumed identity. She would be dressed as a man doing labor in a livery barn somewhere in Indiana. The sightings, the stories, the so-called visions, they blurred into a carnival of confusion. Belle was no longer a suspect or a widow or even a killer. She had become something else entirely. She was a phantom. Even Ray Lamphere, still jailed in LaPorte, wasn't spared from the hysteria. One newspaper claimed he was being visited nightly by Belle's ghost, haunted by the woman he once loved and possibly helped destroy. Others described him as a, quote, raving lunatic, broken under the weight of guilt. But there was no truth behind it. Ray had said no such thing. These were fabrications, stories conjured by the press to feed the public's appetite for drama. And like everything else surrounding Belle, they blurred the line between truth and theater. With the investigation losing credibility by the hour, Sheriff Smutzer made a decision. He hired a miner, like gold miner, or like gold digger
Okay,
miner.
I was gonna say, wait, what?
Yeah. Not a miner, not like a child or anything like that, but a miner.
Mr.
Not a
Mayfield,
minor.
Did you commit the crime?
I'm going to write it in my Etch-a-Sketch. Well, he hired a miner, like a digger miner,
okay.
not a minor, but a miner.
Gotcha.
Lewis
Pickaxe miner.
Yeah, a pickaxe miner. Yes. Anyways,
We got it.
Lewis Scholes. Lewis Scholes was to begin sifting through the ashes of the farmhouse, searching for the only piece of evidence that might still prove Belle was dead: her dental bridge work. Dr. Norton, Belle's dentist, had already confirmed that the gold crowns and porcelain he used wouldn't have melted in the fire. If Scholes could find them, they could finally put this nightmare to rest. But at that point, the damage had been done. However, May 9th marked the first day, though, at the Gunness farm when no new bodies were found. We're talking from April 28th to May 9th. May 9th is the first time they don't. Yeah, by the way, we're only like a week into this shit. Mm-hmm. Maybe a little over 10 days, 12 days.
And the farm burned when again?
April 28th, 1908. We're just now to May 9th, 1908.
Gotcha.
So you are literally 11 days later in all of this happening.
Okay.
That we've talked about so far. But the crowds were still growing, and so was the legend. At first, they came to look, but soon they came for something else. By mid-May, the excavations had slowed. No new bodies had been uncovered for several days. Investigators were still digging, and Scholes had only just begun his search for Belle's bridge work. But for the general public, the Gunness mystery had already given them what they wanted: death, horror, and a legend. Now they wanted to see it for themselves. Thousands descended on LaPorte, spilling onto the Gunness property from the early hours of the morning until well after sundown. They came by foot, wagon, horse, and rail car, lining the roads for miles. Mothers brought their children. Young couples posed for photographs. Entire families picnicked on the lawn where Belle's victims had been carved and buried. The town was unprepared for the surge. LaPorte had fewer than 10,000 residents at the time. The crowd that came and formed outside Belle's farm nearly doubled that. And then came the vendors. Sensing opportunity, local merchants and traveling peddlers set up stands along the road and in the fields. They sold popcorn, lemonade, sandwiches, hawked buttons and ribbons, and offered souvenirs pulled from the dirt: stones, rusted nails, and splinters of lumber labeled, quote, "from the Gunness house." Some even claimed to sell locks of Belle's hair, though no one could say how they came by it. Children played tag around the dig sites. Men offered to show visitors the burial pits for a nickel. One booth handed out 10 replicas of pickaxes and shovels stamped with the date of Andrew Helgelian's discovery. The macabre had become mundane. Local law enforcement tried to contain the chaos, but it was too late. The Gunness farm had become a circus. What should have been hollow ground was now a destination. Mm-hmm. People climbed through the wreckage, snapping photographs of themselves beside the cellar door. They dug into the soil with their own hands, hoping to strike bone or burlap. Even when officials roped off the pits and posted guards, visitors slipped through at night, scavenging for relics under the light of the moon. Many stopped at the makeshift morgue on the property, where the victims' remains had been laid out for identification. Even Sheriff Smutzer himself initially allowed people tours, 9 at a time, ushering people inside to see the charred torsos and severed limbs, gruesome evidence of the horror that had unfolded. But when the crowds grew unmanageable, he ordered the morgue padlocked shut. While the women clawed at the wooden siding, desperate to get a look inside, and men hoisted one another up, pressing their faces to the windows, trying to glimpse the corpses within. No one mourned and no one prayed. Instead, they laughed and they bought and they posed. In the span of just a few weeks, the quiet farm on the edge of LaPorte had gone from homestead to crime scene to something far more disturbing: a monument for murder. The fire had taken almost everything: timber, bone, flesh, memory. What little remained had been trampled under the boots of gawkers and investigators alike. But in the ruins on the Gunness farmhouse, one hope still flickered: proof. If Belle was truly dead, it needed to be proven. If she wasn't, then the authorities had indicted the wrong man. That uncertainty had turned Laporte upside down, and the pressure to deliver an answer fell squarely on Sheriff Smutzer. So he called in, well, we know he already called him in, but anyways, he called upon Louis Schultz, the miner.
Mm-hmm.
He had a reputation and he had persistence. He looked at him and said, one task, find Belle's teeth. He's getting antsy at this point. It's basically where I'm getting at. He's been out there like, sifting through all this shit. And finally he's like, I've had enough. Find her goddamn teeth.
Well, and two, he's already seen there's a paper trail leading to Belle, but he's still trying to push Ray as being the killer,
Yes,
right? Okay.
Very much. Yeah. So Scholes constructed.
Yeah, he has a narrative and he's going to stick to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, Scholes constructed a sluice, a long inclined trowel lined with mesh to catch the smallest fragments left behind. He spent day after day waist deep in soot and slurry, feeding shovelfuls of ash through the system. Water flushed away the debris while Scholes sifted the remains, fingers blackened and eyes raw from the smoke still lingering in the air. On May 19th, 1908, 21 days after the fire, his patience was rewarded. From the scorched debris emerged two small items, dental bridges. One cracked and blackened, the other almost pristine, glinting with traces of porcelain and gold. Scholes turned them over to the sheriff, who immediately contacted Dr. Norton, who confirmed they were Belle's. He had treated Belle personally. He had crafted at least one of the bridges himself and was intimately familiar with the structure of her mouth. When he examined the recovered pieces, he didn't hesitate. That curvature, the fillings, the bite pattern, it all matched. To the authorities in Laporte, that was enough. They announced that the body found headless in the basement was indeed Belle Gunness, and they said it with finality. But Ray Lanfear's attorney, Warden, wasn't so quick to accept it. He argued that evidence was too convenient. The bridges hadn't been found until weeks after the fire, long after hundreds of people had trampled the site. Warden insisted they could have been planted, dropped into the ruins by someone trying to close the case. And while the dental work may have matched Belle's, the body it was supposedly pulled from still didn't make sense. The torso, he reminded everyone, didn't fit Belle's size. His objections were sharp, but the jury had already been steered at this point. So the coroner's panel met, reviewed the dental testimony, and returned its decision. The body in the cellar was Belle Gunness. Period. What followed would be a trial not just of a man, but of the very story that Laporte had come to believe. Whether Ray Lanfear killed Belle or helped her disappear, one thing was now certain. The state of Indiana was ready to convict him either way. On Wednesday, May 20th, so one day after after they find the teeth, Coroner Mack filed his official report with the Laporte court clerk. God, say all of that 10 times quick. His conclusion was that Belle Gunness had come to her death by homicide, though the perpetrator was unknown. 2 days later, the grand jury returned its answer. On Friday, May 22nd, Ray Lanfear was formally indicted for arson and the first-degree murders of Belle Gunness and her 3 children. The man who had once stood at the end of Belle's life now stood accused of snuffing it out entirely. The case of the state of Indiana versus Ray Lanfear began in Laporte on November 9th, 1908. It would last just over 2 weeks, closing arguments falling on November 25th. By then, the courtroom was nearly collapsing under the weight of public interest. The space had been built to hold 250 people, over 500 spectators crammed inside. Others stood on benches or leaned through open windows. Reporters from Chicago and beyond scribbled furiously into notebooks, all desperate to capture the story of the century. Judge William Richter presided over the proceedings. Prosecutor Smith led the state's case. Warden, the seasoned attorney with a flair for drama, defended Lanfear. And the stakes were brutal. If convicted of murder, Ray faced the gallows. The state had a very straightforward strategy. They would prove that Belle Gunness died in the fire and that Ray Lanfear had lit the match. Prosecutor Smith painted Ray as a jilted, unstable suitor, a man humiliated by rejection and obsessed with revenge. Belle had feared him. That much was undeniable. In the weeks before the fire, she had filed multiple complaints, secured restraining orders, and tried to have him declared insane. Sheriff Smutzer and others testified that Belle had repeatedly warned them that Ray was dangerous, that he had threatened her life and her children's. Neighbors said they seen Lanfear lurking near the farm in the hours before the fire broke out. But the most critical piece of the evidence wasn't behavioral. It was dental. Dr. Norton took the stand. He identified the set of porcelain false teeth with gold crowns recovered from the ruins. He had made one of them for Belle the previous year. To the prosecution, these teeth were not just dental work, they were the proof of death. If Belle's teeth were in the ash, so was Belle. And if she was dead, then Ray Lamphere was her killer. Smith pressed the jury hard. Ray had the motive, opportunity, and the physical evidence. Those charred teeth, Belle's past fears, and the circumstances of the blaze were just enough to prove intent. But Warden came prepared for war. His defense offered a counter theory so bold it momentarily seemed to shift the entire direction of the trial. Belle Gunness was alive. Warden didn't deny that his client had a volatile past with Belle. In fact, he admitted Ray had been jealous, erratic, and at times a public nuisance. But he argued that jealousy wasn't murder and troubled didn't mean homicidal. Instead, Warden laid out a narrative of deception. Belle had staged her own death. She had poisoned her own children, possibly lured another woman to the farm, murdered her, and planted the body in the basement. She then vanished into the night, leaving Ray to take the fall. And the defense went hard after the corpse. Physicians had noted that the body in the cellar was too small to be Belle. Warden pointed to this as the linchpin of the case. If the corpse wasn't Belle, then everything else collapsed. But he had one trick up his sleeve. Warden brought forth John Anderson, a neighboring farmer who testified that just 2 days before the fire, Belle had driven past his property in her buggy with a strange woman beside her. She wasn't as large as Belle, but she was close. Belle had stopped at John's to chat about flowers, letting John Anderson catch sight of the woman. Anderson never saw that woman again. After the fire, he told the sheriff what he'd witnessed. It was a tantalizing possibility that Belle had lured this woman to her death and used her body as a stand-in. And Warden then attacked the dental evidence. He didn't dispute that the bridge work belonged to Belle, but he questioned its placement. If Belle had planned to fake her own death, she could have simply planted the dental bridge herself. Dr. Norton had claimed it would be very difficult to remove the appliance before death, but Warden insisted Belle was clever enough to manage it. I mean, look what she's done.
Right.
Sorry, I got to take a drink.
No, I mean, you're right. She was clever enough to manage it. I mean, look at what she's already done with the methodical approach that she took on murdering her victims. What makes you think she couldn't do something as small as removing a bridge and placing it in the exact spot that it needed to be?
Exactly. I mean, she's sly enough to handle all that.
Mm-hmm.
She may have a little bit of pain and a hole in her mouth, but, you know.
Something tells me that didn't hurt her too damn bad, because I think she's tough.
She's the tough O'Brien.
Oh, yeah.
Well, then came the poison. Autopsies had revealed arsenic and strychnine in the bodies of the 3 children and the decapitated woman in the cellar. That meant they hadn't died from smoke or flame. They were likely killed beforehand, and poison was Belle's motive. Warden argued that Ray was no killer. At worst, he was a pawn, maybe even an accomplice, but not the mastermind, and not the one who took lives. The trial became a cultural civil war inside the courtroom. 2 newspapers in LaPorte took opposing sides. The Republican-leaning LaPorte Herald supported the prosecution, calling Ray a dangerous man and praising Smith's work. But the LaPorte Argus, a Democratic paper edited by Harry and Darling, stood firmly in Lamphere's corner. Darling called Ray a patsy and printed editorials insisting, quote, that she's alive. Somewhere out there, the Black Widow was still spinning her web. Well, the jury deliberated for just over 24 hours. On November 26, 1908, they returned their verdict. Ray Lamphere was acquitted of murder.
Hell yeah.
The prosecution had not proven that the victims...
As it should have been.
The prosecution had not proven that the victims died in the fire. In fact, the evidence of poisoning suggested otherwise. But he was convicted of arson. According to reports, some jurors had pushed for a murder conviction with life in prison. Others weren't convinced Ray had intended to kill anyone at all. So in the end, they compromised. Judge Richter sentenced Lamphere to 2 to 21 years in the Indiana State Prison at Michigan City. With good behavior, he could be out in as little as 2. Ray accepted the outcome without protest. He said, quote, I have no complaint to make about the verdict, he told reporters. Things looked pretty blue, but it might have been worse. He insisted again that he had not set the fire. Yes, he'd been near the road that night, but he never touched the house. And in a strange twist, despite his defense's claims, Ray himself believed the dead woman was Belle. Quote, regardless of what other people may think, that was her. Ray denied knowing anything about Andrew Helgelian's murder, brushing aside any connection to the deeper horrors of the farm. Warden appealed the case to the Indiana Supreme Court, but with a 2-year backlog, it was unlikely to change anything. By the time it came up, Ray might already be a free man. But the question lingered. Was Ray Lamphere a killer or a scapegoat? Some believe Belle had set him up from the start. After all, she had repeatedly told others that Ray had threatened her life. When her house burned and her body was supposedly found inside, Ray became the obvious suspect. Maybe that had always been her plan. Even the night before the fire, Belle had bought kerosene, settled her will, and closed out her financial affairs. The timing was no accident. However, some suspected politics had played a part too. Prosecutor Smith, a Republican under pressure, needed a conviction. The town demanded answers, and finding Belle's teeth had offered a very tidy solution for the upcoming election year. But doubts never disappeared. The dental bridge found in the ash was the smoking gun, but many believed it had been planted. Harry Darling, the Argus editor, insisted Belle had orchestrated everything right down to dropping her own teeth into the rubble. The physical discrepancy in the corpse's size refused to go away. The woman in the cellar was far smaller than Belle. The state never resolved that. They just pressed forward. In the end, LaPorte citizens split into 2 camps. Some believed Belle was dead. Others believed she had escaped. What were you going to say, Ryan?
I was going to say, they were trying to get him for something because they couldn't pin the murder on him. They still wanted to get him for something to save face, to say, well, we weren't right about the murder, but we were right about something here. So you're going to have to go to jail for something.
Yeah.
To make it. Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Yeah. And it's about to piss you off here in just a little bit.
Yeah.
But anyways, some believed Belle was dead. Others believed she had escaped. And caught between them was Ray Lamphere, the man who either burned a family alive or took the fall for the most cunning murderer Indiana had ever known. Well, even after the gavel fell and Ray Lamphere was behind bars, the story was far from finished. In December 1909, just a year into his prison sentence, Ray Lamphere died of tuberculosis in the Indiana State Prison.
Oh, man.
He left this world quietly, but not before delivering one final twist. According to a front-page expose that surfaced in January 1910, Ray Lamphere made a deathbed confession to a man of the cloth, Reverend E.A. Shell. The story first emerged in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch and quickly spread through papers across the country. And like everything else in the Belle Gunness saga, it was confounding. Lamphere allegedly admitted to assisting Belle, but not in the way the prosecution had claimed. In this supposed confession, he revealed that he had helped dispose of some of Belle's victims and even procured chloroform for her to kill men, including Andrew Helgelian. It was a dark admission, suggesting that Ray had been more than just a troubled former employee. He had been an accomplice, complicit in covering her crimes. But the most shocking part of the story reversed everything the trial had claimed. According to the confession, Ray and a female accomplice had returned to the farmhouse on the night of the fire, intending to rob Belle. The plan spun out of control. Belle and her children, he claimed, were chloroformed and killed in the process. The fire was not an act of vengeance, but the result of a robbery gone tragically wrong. In this version of events, Belle really did die in the fire, just not by her own hand. He also claimed that Jenny Olson, Belle's foster daughter, had not been murdered by Belle at all, contradicting the popular belief that Belle had killed her to keep secrets buried. And Ray went one step further. He named his accomplice, a woman who had helped him that night, and there was some traction to that story. The woman named as the accomplice was Miss Elizabeth Smith, who was later arrested on suspicion of being that accomplice. But the case fizzled. Nothing stuck. If Ray's confession was true, it shifted everything. It meant that Ray was guilty, yes, but not just of arson. He was guilty of something far worse. But it also meant Belle Gunness didn't escape. She had died there in LaPorte. The legend, if this was to believe, had burned with her. But was it true? Many historians then and now have met the confession with skepticism. It wasn't given directly to the public. It was filtered through a reporter, Edward Beckley of the Chicago Tribune, and printed secondhand. The timing was also suspect. It painted Ray in a complex but almost redemptive light, absolving Belle of murdering her own children, confirming her death, and satisfying the public's desire for closure. It was too convenient. Even now, the confession leaves more questions than answers. Some believe Ray Lamphere, was merely a pawn, a man caught in the vortex of Belle's manipulation. Others are convinced still that he was actively involved, tangled in her crimes until the very end. Crime author Harold Schechter cuts to the heart of the ambiguity. He says, quote, "The truth about Lamphere's role is a little unclear. Belle had openly loathed Lamphere in the final months. She'd made threats and filed complaints, but she was also the one who purchased kerosene the night before the fire. She settled her will, she had her poison and the teeth, she had control." Schechter ultimately believes Belle set the fire and that Ray had nothing to do with it. If true, then Lamphere had not been falsely accused. But Ray's story was only part of the larger legacy. The Lamphere trial hadn't solved anything. It had just opened more floodgates. Public reaction after his death. And what were you going to say, Ryan?
I'll say this man has been ground into powder. He is pretty much a malleable piece of clay. And he's going to go with, well, I guess if you said I did it, I did it. You know, he's one of those guys. Like, he's been beaten down so badly. It's...
I don't think he ever gave a confession.
I don't think so either.
I think that was law enforcement trying to wrap it up and put a nice little bow on it.
Mm-hmm.
So, see, we're not wrong. He confessed only to a priest on his deathbed. No, he didn't.
Yeah, I would.
Sorry, I have hot opinion on that. Go ahead.
You're good. Well, public reaction after his death and confession was divided and intense. Many simply couldn't believe that a middle-aged Norwegian farm woman had committed such atrocities. Others were captivated by her. They passed around twisted rumors that Belle had fed her suitors to pigs or ground them into sausage. Children even sang rhymes about hell's Belle. She had crossed from criminal into legend. In the aftermath of the trial and Ray's death, sightings of Belle Gunness multiplied across the country. She became a kind of specter, a wandering ghost in flesh and blood. People claimed to have seen her in New York, San Francisco, and everywhere in between. Most described a large woman who resembled her, but none of the leads ever amounted to anything. She became an American myth, glimpsed like a phantom and gone just as quickly. Then came one of the most enduring conspiracy theories. In 1931, more than 2 decades after the fire, a 72-year-old woman named Esther Carlson was arrested in Los Angeles for poisoning a man to collect his insurance money. She bore a striking resemblance to Belle Gunness, who would have been about 72 years old at the time. She had even been talking about insurance. The resemblance and the motive were too similar to ignore. Some who had known Belle in Indiana swore Carlson was Belle, living under a new name. The headline screamed, "Notorious widow found alive in California." But the mystery died before it could be solved. Esther Carlson died in custody before she could be definitively identified. Whether she was Belle or not became just another footnote in the saga. Even a century later, the mystery still refuses to rest. In 2008, forensic anthropologists tried once more to solve the case. They exhumed the purported remains of Belle Gunness and attempted to match DNA from the body to licked envelopes believed to carry her saliva. The results? Inconclusive. The test neither confirmed nor disproved the identity of the remains. The woman in the cellar still kept her secrets. Books like Hell's Princess, documentaries, articles, and podcasts continue to revisit the Gunness murders. Many explore the broader conditions of the early 1900s, an era of lonely hearts scams and insurance cons, and suggest that Belle thrived because of the loopholes in the system. Ray Lamphere's trial is often re-examined with fresh eyes. Many view him as a scapegoat, a man swept up in the maelstrom he couldn't escape. In LaPorte, the legend of Belle Gunness has become woven into the town's identity. The old farm is called, quote, Murder's Hill, and some still say her ghost walks the grounds waiting for someone else to take the fall. The fire at the Gunness farm reduced more than just a house to ash. It ignited a mystery that has smoldered for over a century. A riddle without a head, a body without a name. Belle Gunness had left behind no corpse the public could trust, no final act that brought clarity. Only scorched earth, severed limbs, and a string of grieving families remained in her wake. By the time the embers cooled, the true number of her victims had climbed to over 40, maybe more. Husbands, brothers, sons, and drifters had all walked willingly to her door and vanished into the soil of her backyard. Some had names, some never did. She charmed them, killed them, and buried them like waste. Then, when her crimes loomed too large, she disappeared into a legend. Ray Lanphier paid the price, but whether he was a pawn, a partner, or just a man caught in the orbit remains up for debate. His trial gave LaPorte the closure it craved, but not the truth it deserved. Belle Gunness was not just a widow, not just a woman scorned. She was an architect of death who exploited love, trust, and vulnerability with surgical precision. Whether she died in that fire or vanished into the fog, the result was the same. She escaped justice. She didn't need horns or wings to become a monster. All she needed was a shovel, a lie, and enough time to bury the truth. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, I got some hot opinions. You're saying that they dug up the one that was purported to be Belle Gunness. Why
Correct.
didn't they dig up the person who died in jail? I would think you just check for that bridge, that missing bridge
Right.
that they found, because you said that they found the bridge and it was pristine. Okay, if it had come out of a fire, it's not going to be pristine. Not going to happen.
I said almost.
So they find
I
it.
mean,
Okay. Well, it's still not going to be almost pristine. It's going to be dirty and gross and covered in yuck. So, but then they dig up what they thought was the body, which didn't match anyway. But the woman who they thought they might have that died in prison, they don't check her teeth. That seems like you go back and you dig that up and you see.
Within 2 decades
But
later, within
there should
20
be some
years,
evidence of that, right? But there should be a dental record of that being done again.
Well, that being done again, but how? So my question is, how's that going to prove that the woman who was in Indiana is that they're the same? Because even though she has it done again, it's not going to matter. She's living as Esther Carlson. She's not going to bring Belle Gunness's dental records with her and go, "Oh, I had this previously done." She's going to be like, "Yeah, I don't know. I got kicked in the jaw by a cow or something, and I just need to get dental bridges done over here now."
She does look suspiciously like Belle Gunness, though.
She does.
Mm-hmm.
But what are the chances this person that looks like this person that they think is this person later in life, what are the chances that she is going to have identical dental work that is done? I mean, number of fillings, bridges, that kind of things. Those are going to be different person to person, and placement will be different as well.
Yeah, but I mean, the likelihood of somebody's teeth. I don't know. I kind of get where you're going with it, but my whole thing is that if she is escaped, let's say she's escaped, she's in California. How I don't know. I mean, it's like she's not going to be like, "Oh, get a hold of my old dentist, Dr. Norton, out of LaPorte, Indiana, and get my dental records and ask him what I had done." No, she's not going to give that up. She's going to be like, "Oh, I had Dr. Smith in Dallas, Texas do it," knowing damn well she's never lived in Dallas, Texas. And they're going to be like, "Well, we couldn't get a hold of him, so I guess we'll just, whatever, mark you down your new." She's not going to give that up. So they're not going to be able to, if it is Belle Gunness is what I'm saying. But she died in custody at the time the lady did as well. So I don't know. Maybe they were trying to do something along that lines and they just never got around to it because she was never definitively identified.
I think they were trying to wrap it up neat.
I think you're right. But I mean, this one is a real head scratcher to me, though, because like I said, when it comes to, I mean, the sheriff putting all of his focus on Ray and going and digging up the bodies, which is great. That's good. That's good detective work. But instead of pursuing, maybe Belle Gunness had gotten off of the farm, that gave her valuable time to get the hell out of Dodge. And back then, you could just disappear. She was a ghost in the wind.
Yeah.
But the thing that kind of bothers me about that theory is her disappearing is people like that don't just stop. They continue to do what they were doing. So is there any record of anywhere else of someone matching that description and doing what she's doing other than the lady in LA?
Not that I found.
So, I mean, that's the only thing that
And they wanted to know,
me.
Fran wanted to know in the comments. Fran wanted to know in the comments, did they say what Esther died of?
No, they did not actually. They just said that she died in custody. That was it.
Okay.
So I can actually do a live, because I found her Hold on, let me see if it says on. I pulled the picture earlier from Find a Grave. Let me see if it notes it on Find a Grave. Sometimes family members will go in and write in there
Right.
what their family members died of. Let me see.
I'm saying that, but that's the piece that bothers me here. Is I do think that she escaped, but I don't understand because like I said they can't just turn that off. They're going to continue to kill.
Tuberculosis.
Oh, she got tuberculosis.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So, but they're gonna continue to kill. So, but there's no record of anybody else doing that we know of. So I don't know. That's the one thing that bothers me about it.
I don't think that the lady in California is Belle Gunness. I just don't.
Mm-hmm. She looks like her.
She does look like her. Same MO. I get it. All that kind of stuff. But it's not to say that there's not another person out there who was inspired by Belle Gunness who wanted to do the same. Who just wanted a little bit of extra money from her husband's life insurance money.
Right.
It's not it by the time that two decades after Belle has gone through this and it's been in the national headlines for God knows how long, the story is well known at this point. It's not hard to say that somebody else is going to become a copycat killer of one of the greatest female that sounds horrible to say, serial killers in American history. You know what I mean? The most
prolific.
fiendish, prolific.
Right.
Don't use greatest with the word serial killer. Apologies, my bad. Prolific serial killers, and I apologize for bringing Dallas into it earlier. Apparently, they're going haywire in the comments about bringing Dallas into it. I lived in Dallas for 10 years, so that's why Dallas came to my brain.
Dallas has its own skeleton.
So I just don't think that the lady in California is her. However, do I think that Belle died in the fire? I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
This woman, to me,
not a chance,
is entirely too fucking greedy.
Right.
She cares about one person and one person only, and that is Belle Gunness.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sorry, but I mean, I know that she's going to be struggling, like to leaving her estate, $46,900, but there is nothing to say that she did not go off and do this again and start all over and just not get caught and rebuild her foundation, somewhere. So, not that I'm aware of as anything else like this happened in the United States that I was able to find.
Mm-hmm.
And I do find it interesting that the bones that were dug up out of her grave, and when compared with the saliva allegedly to be on the envelope, that it was inconclusive. I think that's kind of interesting that even 100 years later, because they did it in 2008, Belle allegedly died in 1908.
Right.
That 100 years later, they still can't the bones in the cellar still can't be proven that they were hers.
I mean, but the thing is, too, is it does not match her build. I mean, that's the biggest thing. The smoking gun to me.
Yeah.
It does not match her build. She was broad-shouldered. She was she was built like she wasn't just fat. She was built. She was like farm strong, and she had, and she was built with broad shoulders and doing what she was doing. And I don't think that woman in the basement was Belle Gunness or Gunness.
Oh, Guinness. I know y'all keep saying Belle Gunness. It's Gunness. No, I don't know. I think that the woman is too smart to do something like that. I think that she escaped. I think the woman was planned, especially whenever you drag in the John Anderson, the neighbor, seen Belle Gunness with another woman. Then that woman disappears. Now, I'm not saying that, okay, she could have just left town. Maybe it was Belle's long lost cousin or whatever, but she seems to have a long streak of lost cousins that come from all over the place, and then they disappear into the soil of her backyard. So I don't know.
Well, I know what happened to her. She moved to Oklahoma and became Nanny Doss.
Wait, does that time out? Hold on. We have a new working theory for Belle Gunness. No, I was kidding. Nanny Doss was what, in the 50s or something like that?
Yeah, I believe she's in the 50s. Okay, 40s and 50s, I think. Yeah. So,
no, Belle would have been like close to 100.
Yeah.
She could have been a lonely hearts killer.
Well, she found the fountain of youth, and then
she could have. She very well could have. Yeah, absolutely.
That's just as likely as her dying in the fire.
Right.
Yeah, right. Yeah. That's a good working theory there, Ryan. No, I will say, so I mean, hopefully I wrapped everything up for y'all. Truly. I hope that I tied everybody's story to the very end. God, when I had to close out Jenny Olsen and I finally figured out exactly what happened to her, I think at one point I called Shelly and I was like welling up because it's just like, God damn, man, this little girl was 16 years old
Right.
when she disappeared, and they find her, and the day that they find her was on her 18th birthday, and it just the magnitude of what that comes with it, that she trusted this woman who was like a mother figure, and then this woman just turned around and just fucking killed her for no other reason than she just knew too much and had seen too much. She was a child.
Was there any evidence that other than when she told the lie for her, was there any evidence that she ever helped Belle commit some of her crimes?
Not that I was able to find.
Okay.
Not that I could not find anywhere that Jenny was an accomplice of any kind. I think that Jenny just became 16 years old. I think she had boys who were interested in her. And I think that probably what happened was Belle could not stand to see her leave knowing that Jenny had seen so much and knew too much. And so I think she just chose to end her life.
I agree
and
with you.
That's why I also don't believe that Belle was in the fire, because that bitch was too cunning and she's a monster.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Shelly. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
Just the whole idea that she could butcher these bodies. That's a whole nother level of gruesome. She did a very, capable. She was very capable of killing these people, of very cleverly discarding the evidence. She kept herself. She kept quiet. She planted just enough suspicion, just enough doubt for Ray to be put under the microscope and ultimately led to his imprisonment. I think she absolutely planted the bridge. Suddenly I can't speak. Planted her bridge. I think she absolutely got away. I think the person that was seen, whether it's fiction or not, I'm sure that there was someone who came out. I mean, really, you said that did you say she was 5'9"?
So I found reports. A lot of people agreed in the report that she was probably around 5'7". I found the lady that was arrested, Cora Heron, was 5'9". But I did also find reports where some said that Belle was upwards of 5'9". Now so I would say her range is somewhere between 5'7" and 5'9".
Okay, so that's like trying to replace Ryan's body with mine. It's not going to match. Yeah. It's going to be definite differences. So yeah. I think that I think she absolutely planned this. And God, I hope she didn't get away. And if she did, I hope that she lived a miserable, rotten life, because it was the least that she deserved, because that is horrible.
I hope she got rotted. I hope she got rotted gonorrhea and her clitoris fell off. I'm just going to say that.
That's an awfully vivid punishment.
I don't know. Just trying to think of, so, like you say, explosive diarrhea with the case of the sneezes, I'm just trying to figure out the worst one that I could possibly get.
Well, with any luck, when she ripped her bridge out, she died of infection later on down the line. But
exactly,
I don't know, man. This one is so frustrating because you want it to end, you want
There's
it to wrap up, but there is no
real ending
here.
And unfortunately, to this day, there still is no real ending to this case. They have tried over and over and over again to prove that Belle died in the fire, but the results over and over every single time are still inconclusive. And even the amount of men that she killed, sorry, they're commenting, gross what I said. Even the men that she killed is still inconclusive. There's some that say that there's more than likely still several bodies that are on the land still, that they just were like, whatever, we're not even going to dig anymore. The only ones that I was able to find where they stopped digging in the stories that I read was upwards of 15. Some said 16, some said 18. So it's going to be somewhere between 15 and 20 is when they stopped digging, but they were able to confirm the other identities of either the other 28, because 28 is what's on a lot of websites. They were able to confirm those through like the letters, the clothing, matching all of that up, the people that were coming in and claiming their family members had disappeared. But the bodies on the property themselves stopped anywhere between 15 to 20.
Well, hopefully she moved back home and fell in a fjord. So
she might have left the United States. You never know.
Hey, you guys.
I think that's most likely. What?
Yeah.
I think we need to bring Chad Wandell on and give away this thing.
Okay, well, Chad can wait. We still got time. We got to get to final moments. Calm down.
Oh my gosh, I'm excited to see one. Sorry.
I understand that. Calm down. You're all right. We still doing our podcast. I was just about to ask for final thoughts. You got to let me get there.
I know.
I'm moderating this bitch tonight. You sit back in back seat and don't drive.
Yes, give in to your anger.
You don't want me to do
Anyways, Ryan, Shelley, final thoughts on this case. What would y'all say for your final? Wrap it up for them.
I am frustrated with this one, like I said, and I really, really hope that poor Ray, I really hope that he found some kind of solace. I mean, maybe he got like 3 hots in a cot and was able just to be okay while he was in prison.
Right.
And I really hope something terrible happened to her wherever she ended up in the world.
So you think she escaped?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I think she did. I mean, everything kind of points to that. There's nothing to say that she was in that fire.
Yeah.
To me.
Okay.
And the body was that body was nowhere near the size of what she would have been. So that's the smoking gun for me. I think she did get away.
Okay. Mm-hmm. All right. I would have to, I'll go ahead and give mine. I would have to agree. I think that there is too much evidence that points to the fact that she got away with it. I don't think there is enough evidence to prove that she was in the fire. So I do believe that Belle Gunness unfortunately got away with this. I don't believe that she died. The body, just all kinds of bullshit all over the place that just leads me to believe that she went somewhere else and either just lived out her life or she could have begun again and just never got caught. As for Ray, I think that he was involved a little bit in the setting of the fire. I don't know why. That's just more of a gut feeling. I don't really have anything to back that up other than a gut feeling after but then again, I read a hell of a lot more than y'all did on this story. So I would say that he was involved with the fire at some point or in some way, but I do believe that Belle escaped. I think that the body was planted, staged. I do think her children died. I think she killed them, poisoned them first, and then burned the house down and ran away. So my final thoughts is she escaped. She got away with it, and she went somewhere. And I hope her right leg fell off, and that she fell into it and jabbed into her heart and killed her a very slow, painful death. Shelley, what say you?
Horrible woman. Horrible, evil woman who I do believe that Ray set the fire as well. I believe that in her planning of the destruction of her family and her, plan for escape, I believe she probably paid Ray, said, "Hey, Ray, I need to collect some insurance money. I need you to come and light a fire this night." I think she probably paid him to set the fire. I think that might be the only part that's probably rings true. And then he ran off, which would be why he was on the road that night. Because I think she was smart enough to do that as part of her plan. I think the bitch did it and she got away with it. Can't be any more clear than that.
Yeah, I agree. And how do you wish that she died?
I don't want to get us kicked off the air, but I have a lot of hot opinions.
choking on a beep, 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 beep.
Oh, don't beat yourself.
We're all agreeing in that she got away with it. All right.
Oh, yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think it's just overwhelming. So, well, like I said, I hope I wrapped up all the loose ends for y'all. But we have other matters that Shelley is just eager to get to, and she's trying to jump my story and my podcast that I'm in charge of.
Talked about it. I'm ready.
So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do our giveaway really quick for the free investigation with Ghost Geeks and EVP. So we're going to bring on our good friends. Love them to Delarissa's Pieces. Y'all welcome Chad and Leslie Wandell to the stage.
What it do?
Hi, Ghost Geeks.
What it do? Can we hear y'all?
I can't hear them.
We can't hear y'all.
We can't hear you.
Their faces. Oh no! Don't worry, he's a geek. He'll figure it out.
He'll figure it out.
In the meantime, we're going to tell y'all that what we're getting ready to do. Chad and Leslie are joining us because they're going to be the ones helping us to draw the name for the investigation. If you joined us at Fan Expo, we had 4 presentations with Ghost Geeks. Or EVP and Ghost Geeks had 4 presentations. At each one, we asked you to submit a selfie on either Ghost Geeks or EVP's page for each presentation. Yes, we can hear you now. And for every picture that you posted, you got a submission into the investigation. So that is what they're here to reveal. Look at all of those.
Yep, 112 names right here.
Woo, 112. All right. Yep. All right. Sweet. Well, let's I'm gonna turn it over to y'all then.
Do your spiel, Ghost Geeks.
I'm gonna turn it over to y'all then. Go for it.
Well, first of all, thanks for everybody that showed up and came out and supported us. We had so many people, and apologies to those that didn't get to come in. I heard that on Saturday for both of our presentations, over 200 people were turned away. So, Fan Expo, if you're listening, we need a bigger room.
At least on Saturday,
At least on Saturday, all right? It was crazy. Yeah. Thanks to you guys for coming and being a part of that and supporting us as well and helping us, just take this to another level and kind of get the awareness out there for both of our teams, because you guys do amazing podcasts, and I think more people should know about them. You should have 500,000 subscribers like right now. It's ridiculous.
Thank
you.
Thank you.
But yeah, so it's one of the things we wanted to do is there's a lot of people that don't know anything about the paranormal that come to the Fan Expo, but they're really interested and intrigued, and so they show up, and so we want to take them with us, and we want to bring you and them with us, and so one of them's in here.
And,
Yay! All right.
and we did have a lot of people who said that they had not ever been on a ghost hunt who were in our panel.
The vast majority.
No.
Probably 90% of the people had never done anything in the paranormal except watch TVs and participate in online stuff. So,
and if all they've seen from paranormal, ghost hunting is what they've seen on TV, then we need
to get them out there.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So without further ado, I guess let's draw a name. Shake them up real good.
So we're gonna draw.
We're gonna draw 2 names. So that way we have a backup if the first person cannot accept the giveaway. So
Okay. Perfect.
All right, you go.
All right.
Dun, dun. I wish I had like a drum roll or something.
I wish I could do a drum roll.
Yeah.
All right. So the first name is Brittany Weiss. So Brittany, Brytney Weiss, Weist. I'll post your name on our page. That's who is it going to focus?
Hold on. Let's see what let's
Hang on, bring it full screen.
Boo! There we go.
It might not focus on that name, or maybe I need to get closer. Nope, that's worse.
Yeah, that's way worse.
Well, we're going to post it on our page as well. That way that person can reach out and contact us. But let's draw a backup name just in case they cannot accept the award here. And the second name is Gary Off.
EOFF.
EOFF. That's a really interesting last name. So I doubt there's many of you guys out there, just like there's very few of me. So Gary, you're in place number 2 if Brittany can't accept.
Sweet.
Hell yeah.
Yay.
Gary,
Heck yeah.
FYI, Gary was in our comments earlier this evening.
Was he?
All
He
right.
was.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks for tuning in, Gary, and watching us live so you could see if you won. Oh, he
Absolutely.
said, "Hey, that's me." Look, he's in the comment. He said, "Hey,
Yeah.
that's
Well,
me."
Gary,
All right.
if Brittany can't accept the overnight investigation, then you are in it, man. So we'll give her like 48 hours to get with us and say yes or no. And if she doesn't contact us or get in touch with us, then it's you.
Yep, we've reached out to you.
Awesome. Well, cool.
Thanks
Well,
everyone for coming out.
well, and thank y'all for jumping on here and getting all that together and pulling some names and all that stuff. You look fine. Don't worry. Don't fix your bun. Shut up. She's not
It's a
touching
girl
her.
thing.
She's not touching her butt for people who are listening to just the audio. She has a bun on the back of her head. Okay. So, but no, I mean, for real, thank y'all for jumping on here and pulling those. So we're gonna do we're gonna wrap this up for us, I guess. So now that we got that taken care of, so we will. Y'all want to hang out in the green room? We'll pull y'all back on the screen in just a second. We'll wrap this up though.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Sweet.
All right.
All right,
Well,
y'all.
Blake,
Well,
and
yep.
with that, why don't you tell them everything they need to know? Congratulations.
Congratulations to Gary and Brittany. Hopefully Brittany can get in touch with them. If not, Gary, be ready. Well, we want to thank y'all for joining us. If you want to support the show directly, check out our Patreon page. It is linked in our link tree, which is going to be posted tomorrow, Wednesday morning, on our Facebook and our X profiles. For just $5 a month, you will unlock over 450 Patreon exclusive videos, including the pre and post broadcast shows, which are the 30 minutes before and the 30 minutes after this broadcast. That's right. You get an extra hour with us every single week for just $5 a month, which means you get 4 extra hours with us on a monthly basis. Your support from that helps keep bringing these ghostly and true crime adventures to you week after week. So if you're not sure about joining Patreon, make sure you can, or not make sure, you can try it out risk-free with our 7-day free trial. So go sign up, check it out, and then become a Patreon member. Make sure to stay connected with us. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and many more by searching Everything Vaguely Paranormal and looking for the green sound wave, or by clicking the icons in our link tree link. Remember, you can watch us live every Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Central Standard Time on Facebook and YouTube, so you can see these gorgeous faces. If you want to meet us in person, you do have a few choices. On June 7th, this weekend, we will be at Chicagoland at the Countryside Banquet Conference Center in LaGrange, Illinois. That is June the 7th. Then we are heading to the Paranormal Rockdown at Broadhead Manor in Broadhead, Wisconsin on July 18th and through the 19th. Then we're swinging over to the Gettysburg Battlefield Bash from July 25th through the 27th in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. And then we are off to Kansas City for KC Paracon on August 2nd. And then we're going out to Vernal, Utah for Phenomicon 2025, September 3rd through the 6th. And finally, we will be attending the Rock Island Roadhouse Esoteric Expo on October 4th in Rock Island, Illinois. So go make sure you also subscribe to our Eventbrite page to be notified when public investigation tickets go on sale, because I believe we just officially sold out of our only investigation we have for sale, but we are going to be putting more on the calendar as the year goes along. We are grateful for your continued support. Every like, comment, share, and download helps to keep these adventures alive. So if you have a favorite episode, share it with your friends. Make sure you tag us. If you have a story, comment, question, or you would like to have us as guests on your show, email us at the evppod@gmail.com. That is THEEVPPOD@gmail.com.
Go like, share, and subscribe to that YouTube page.
Absolutely. Well, y'all, thank y'all so much again for joining us for another weekly episode of Everything Vaguely Paranormal. As always, I am Blake Smith, and with me are my partners in the paranormal, Miss Shelley Pruitt, Mr. Ryan Roberts. Sorry, Ryan. Mr. Robert.
I am not Robin Roberts. She's on Good Morning America.
Miss Shelley Pruitt, Mr. Ryan Roberts, and a huge shout out to Leslie and Chad Wandale from Ghost Geeks for coming on and revealing the name. Thank y'all again. And as always, we will see you next Tuesday. Bye, y'all.
Bye, y'all.
Bye-bye.